Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to go ahead and help you out with your midterm. So there's different ways that you can tackle this particular problem, right? So the first thing that you'll notice is we do not have any IDs, and as I've said before, the easiest way to work with HTML elements in JavaScript is by bringing them with the getElementById. So if we were to come in here and say ID equals, I'll just create an ID of, let's see, btn-7. That would be my ID for button 7, and that way I could create an getElementById for this one and create an addEventListener for that particular element. Now, let's put that into perspective. We have 10 numeric values, so from 1 to 9 and the 0, right? So right off the bat, we have 10 values that we need to go ahead and be accounting for. So that is 10 getElementByIds and 10 addEventListeners for each one of these elements. Then we need to take into account the period, the equals, and the operators, as well as the clear last entry and clear all. So as you can see right off the bat, you would have approximately about 60-ish lines of code just for the basics. So getting your elements and adding the event listeners to them. Now, if that is the way that you wish to go, then I'm not going to stop you. But I'm going to go ahead and show you a more simple way of doing things, all right? So let me delete that, save that out. So in our JavaScript, I'm going to go ahead and create a constant, and I'm just going to call this number btn. And I'm going to set this to document, get element, get elements, no, I'm sorry, query selector. That's the guy I'm looking for. So in the query selector, I'm going to look for all the buttons that have the class of number, okay? So now in here, what I can go ahead and do is just open up a string as you normally would, double quotes or single quotes, it doesn't make much of a difference. And I'll go ahead and write dot, no, not button, I'm sorry, number. Now the important part here is you need to make sure that if you're looking for a class, which in this case we are, you need to include the dot at the beginning, okay? Else, JavaScript is going to assume that you are looking for a tag, all right? So if I do this, it's going to think that I'm looking for a tag called number. Obviously, you do not have a tag called number, so nothing would be returned, as well as no actual error, okay? Because you can go ahead and look for customized HTML tags, and that is perfectly valid. And that is one of the downsides of working with this. So if you're not careful or you just get distracted, just make sure that you look at this part here and make sure that your query selector all, you're including the dots for the class, okay? Okay, so from this point on, we can go ahead and work with some elements in here. So what I'll go ahead and do is bring in the number button. And there, technically, if we look at these values, you could say that this is the way the query selector works. It's not going to grab a single element. It's going to grab all the elements in our HTML file that conform to this class. So in this case, it's going to grab all 10. No, I lost the word. All 10 div tags that have the class of number, and it's going to try and do something with them. So what that something is up to us. One thing that we can try and think of this is we're going to grab all of these elements, and then we're going to bundle them into what, and this part is just me, exemplifying. So at this point in time, whenever the JavaScript code gets executed, query selector sees who has this class of number, and in this case, it's all these numbers, and it's like, all right, cool. So now number btn contains the following elements, right? Now it's technically 0, 1, 2, 3. Right? So technically you could think of number btn right now having an array of these elements, right? they're not exactly these numbers yet. They're still technically, the divs along with all their elements. So, but inside of those divs, if we drill down further down, we'll find eventually these values which are being displayed on the buttons themselves, right? So we can think of this as an array, okay? And in other programs, if you want to navigate an array, what you can do is do a for each, or you could go ahead and nest for clauses, right? But a for each clause is actually much simpler to use. So in JavaScript, the for each is not an independent system, it is a built-in function. So in here, if we do dot for each, you'll notice that now we're telling the JavaScript. So for this variable, this constant right here, I want to do a for each element. So basically you're telling for every element inside of this variable, I want to do the following. Now in here, the for each takes a function, okay? And that function is as follows. So you can just go ahead and say function, and then we'll open up parentheses, brackets, and then here we can go ahead and write our function, or you can do it with the arrow notation and you can just get rid of the word function and just do equals greater than, and both of these notations are the exact same thing. Okay, so now in here, we can go ahead and do something for each one of these elements, right? Now, the only thing that you need to worry about is you need to pass in how you want to name these quote unquote each value. So in here, I'll just create a variable called number. And so for each number, I want to do the following, okay? So in here, we can say for each number, I want to add an event listener, right? So add event listener. In this case, whenever the function gets clicked, we want to, right now, let's just go ahead and do something simple, and I'll create another function in here, like so. And we're missing a comma right here. Right here. There we go. So right now, let's do something simple, and let's just say console log. And then I just want to go ahead and grab that element, so I'll say number. And let's see what we get, all right? So if I click this value, got reference number, number, there we go. So you see now we get back the ID. Well, I'm sorry, not the ID, but the div with the class button number. Now, obviously, this is, very, very generic. So we can go ahead and drill down in here and see what we need to go ahead and do in order to actually get the value that we wish. Now, in this case, it is a simple HTML element. And as you can see, we could just go ahead and grab the inner text. So if I were to come in here and say dot, whoop, inner, spelling is hard today, text. Let's see what we get different now. Okay, so I'll click one of these values and voila. Now I'm getting back a number 5. If I click this guy, I get a 4, 9, 7, 8, 6, 2, 3. So we have effectively come up with a way to get any value from these numeric ones, and for all intents and purposes, basically any one of these other operators, okay? And work with them, right? So now instead of having to write 20 lines of code, including the get element by IDs and add event listeners, all I needed to do was create a single query selector and use a for each that uses a function. That function just is being passed in another variable, which we are telling it inside of the numbers button for each value called number, and number we are just being the ones referring to it, and that's how we want to refer to any element inside of number btn. Go ahead and do the following. So in this case, the following is for every number, add an event listener, which will be triggered by a click, and when that happens, just log out the inner text of that element, okay? And as you can see, it's fairly straightforward, right? So now that we know how to graph that element, how can we go ahead and have that element be displayed up here? All right, so that is going to be the next part that I'm going to go ahead and help you with. All right, so if we go over to the index, we can see that we have a display 1 and display 2. So let's go ahead and see who's who, right? So if I come over here, let's just switch over to the inspector. If I click this element, it should go ahead and allow me to show. So the bottom one is display 2 and the top one is display 1. There's a third one called temporary result that's somewhere around here, okay? But you can go ahead and, for the most part, just ignore this one element since it's not really conducive to much. It was just there for testing purposes, all right? If you just want to go ahead and use it, you go ahead, knock yourself out. But in this case, we know right now that display 2 would be our quote-unquote main display. Now, in this particular instance, since, there is no other element called display 2, it would also make sense to make this an ID. But again, in this case, you're just repeating ID display 2, class display 2, right? So let's just go ahead and just use a query select for that. So I'll do a const, and we'll say display 2. Display dash 2. Underscore 2, I'm sorry. Equals to document dot query select. And then it's going to be the same thing. So we're going to bring in display dash 2. Okay. So now whenever we want to go ahead and refer to that guy, we can go ahead and do so. All right. So again, since in this case there's only a single one, we just want to go ahead and use query selector because the very first value that it bumps into with this class, value, or tag is going to be the one that is returned. And since we know there is no other element called display2 in our page, it is safe to do so. All right. So I'll go ahead and come down here. Now, how can we go ahead and just display this in, right? So how about instead of just logging this in here, I can come in here and then just say, well, first off, let's analyze display2, right? Although it's going to be fairly similar. We'll just go ahead and say display2, save that. So now at this point in time, whatever button we click, display2 is going to be rendered out, right? So in here, we see display2. Let's analyze display2. And you can see display2 also has an inner text and inner HTML. So we can go ahead and make use of this. So what about if we were to go say display2 dot inner text was equal to number dot inner text. Let's see what would happen if this was the case. So if I press one of these numbers, what do you know? Now the display gets updated with that value. Now if I go ahead and click this, the display gets updated again, but you'll notice that we have now a small issue. That issue is that the values are not being concatenated, they're just being overwritten by whatever the last number being pressed was. So obviously that is no good, and we need to come up with a way that we can make this be concatenated with the current existent value, okay? So how can we go ahead and do that? Well, if let's say that my first value is a 5, we know now that display underscore 2 dot inner text contains a value of 5, and I just want to add to that. So what I can go ahead and do is grab the current value of display 2 and say to that, go ahead and add the following, okay? So now, if I were to do this, you see, now we are concatenating values together, right? Just as a regular calculator would. Now, And just in this small part alone, you already have quite a bit of what you need to do to make this project work, right? So you have your numbers button, so you can go ahead and identify what number you need for this to go ahead and actually work. Now, what would be different in terms of these values here? Well, that's going to be up to you to figure out. We're just going to go a little bit further into styling this out for right now. So, obviously, you know, we all know that the 0 is, non-conducive in terms of the result of your operation if it's to the left of any mathematical value, right? So this 0 practically, it's a 0, so it's not actually adding or subtracting values to this set of values after it, okay? So we can go ahead and try and get rid of this number. Not that it's going to really affect us, it's just there and it looks bad, okay? So what can we do in order to stop this? Well, we are inside of a function. So we can just say if, and we can say display -2 dot inner text, and we can say if this is equal to 0, then we just want to go ahead and do a concatenation. But with, I'm sorry, not a concatenation, but just have that first value be overwritten. Else, we can just go ahead and start concatenating these values, right? So let's save this out. So now in here we have a 0. If I click this, you see that 0 gets overwritten. But if I click another value, now my 5 doesn't get overwritten. Okay? So now we have a way to make sure that if the calculator is inside of its default state, this 0 gets overwritten, but by whatever first character we press by, okay? Now, let's see what happens if I do 0. Obviously, it stays there. Another 0, you know, it's just there. We're not going to be adding 0, 0, 0. So far now, for all intensive purposes, you could say, I have a way of capturing these values, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and help you even more, just a little bit more. So obviously, we have a way to send over a value in here. Now, what is going to happen when we go ahead and hit one of these operator buttons? At this point in time, nothing is happening, right? So let's go ahead and create a similar structure for our operators, all right? So in this case, you'll notice that the operation, so divide, times, minus, plus, and equals, or no, I'm sorry, except for the equals. The equals has he's his own thing. The operation, they are their own values, right? So we can go ahead and do a query selector for them as well. So I'll do it right underneath the number. I'll do constant. We'll say operation btn equals document dot query selector all. And we'll do the operation, right? So again, we'll go ahead and move this below. Then in here, we can just say operation button dot for each. And we'll do the exact same thing. I'll go ahead and create a function in here. Like so. Now in here for each operator, we want to do the following, right? So we're going to add an event listener. So we're going to say number, no, not number, operator dot add event listener. In this case, we want to listen for a click as well. And then we want to go ahead and, do something with it. So let's just create another function in here. Now, again, we already know how we can get the internal values of these guys, right? So in this case, we just want to go ahead and think of the logical steps that follow whenever you use a calculator in real world, right? So let me just bring over a calculator here. You know, obviously we've all used it, but let's just exemplify it a little bit further, right? So I input my number, and then I click one of these operators. That number gets ported over here. Now, this part here doesn't need to be exactly like this, all right? If you want to go ahead and display the number up top, that is completely up to you, but, you know, we'll go ahead and look at it step by step, right? So what happened the moment I clicked the plus symbol? So first off, this number got ported up here along with the operator symbol that I have chosen, right? So now if I go ahead and write another number, the display gets reset to that other value, right? So now if I hit equals, you know, I get my results and I see the operation up top. So, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So again, to recap, the moment we hit the plus symbol, our current value along with the operator that we selected get saved out. So we need to go ahead and emulate that behavior here as well. So how can we go ahead and save that out? Well, in here we know that we have a value called operator. So we can just go ahead and create external variables. So I'll say we'll create these as let values. So I'll call this chosen operator. And I'll call this first value. So the first value that we're working with and the chosen operator. So, and I'm going to use these variables to store the first value that we go ahead and input, as well as the chosen operator of the operation. Okay. So in here, since we have an event listener for all the operators, it doesn't really matter. Well, we don't need to go ahead and worry ourselves with how we're going to go ahead and determine which value was clicked just yet. Okay. So for all intents and purposes, we can just say chosen operator equals operator dot inner text. And for our first value, we can just say first value equals. And if you want to go ahead and do so right now, you can convert this so parse floats. So it becomes a numeric value and stops being a string, because eventually we are going to need to convert this into an actual number to do math with it. We can then just go ahead and say display2 dot inner text. I have those values saved in. Now I can go ahead and just come down below and just do a console log just to verify that that operation indeed has gone through. I'll say chosen operator. And underneath this, we'll go ahead and do another one for our first value. And we'll go ahead and save that out. And let's just, let's see what happens. So let's do 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and we'll do a multiplication. In this case, you see we get our x, and we get our 1, 2, 3. So far so good. We now have a way to, well, this is still, we still have a small issue in here. But at this point in time, we have a way to grab the first value of the user and as well as the operator and save those values over so we can use them later and we don't lose those values, okay? Now, what issue do we have right now? Well, if I go ahead and, press one of these buttons, now, obviously this is not what we want, right? We would want this value to be reset and then continue with our merry operation of inputting values, right? But that is an easy fix, okay? So all we need to really do is reset the value of display 2. So if I go ahead and just delete this, because we know that we are already saving this, we can just reset the value of display 2. So we say display underscore 2 dot inner text is equal to 0. So now we are resetting the value of the inner text to be 0, and then this other guy can go ahead and, kick in and start resetting these values. So if we do this, you see now those values get saved. Obviously they're not displaying because I removed the console logs, but this gets reset. So there you have it. Now, one last thing that I'm going to go ahead and help you with. Obviously, we would like to go ahead and update this display up top. So that is fairly easy, right? So all that we're going to go ahead and do is do another variable. Let me just do this in order. Call this constant display underscore 1 equal. I should just copy this from the get-go. So I'll change this to a 1. And then what we can go ahead and do here is also do this display 1 dot not inner HTML but inner text equals 2, and we can say first value plus chosen operator. Now let's see if that works, because remember we turned this into an actual number, but in theory, since this is just a string, it should just concatenate them, right? So we'll do 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 5, 2, and then we'll do minus, and there we go. So now we have our value up top. Okay, guys, so I feel like this is a fairly generous helping hand. Obviously, the the query selector is a new value, but as you can see, it is fairly easy to use, and our code is not that complicated. As you can see, by using these for each, we are basically saving ourselves a huge amount of code just alone by using the what's the name of it? If you were using the get element by ID, this code alone would more or less be what you would need for just to get the values from the clicks of the user. Now, be mindful it is just basically the get element by ID as well as the add event listeners. You would still need to go ahead and create your function that does this, right? So you would still need to have even a little bit of extra code down below. Whereas by using these query selectors, as you can see, we're more than halfway there with our midterm, right? So the rest, I'm going to leave it up to you. What is missing at this point? Well, the behavior for our equals button. So whenever, I start inputting in here another number, so let's just say 150, the moment I hit the equal sign, this should just be returning to me a 2, right? Because 152 minus 150 is 2. So you need to go ahead and set that behavior for this button. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. So I hit equals. This should return, my result, obviously. So you need to go ahead and create a query selector for that one particular element, which is the equals, and then just think what you need to do. So obviously you're going to have a second value in here, which in theory you can go ahead and create another variable in here called second value, or you can just reuse or use the value of display inner text since that is currently available to you. But don't forget that in this case, first value has, where are you? Here we go, been converted into an actual number. So if you do use display inner text 1, you need to wrap this around a parse float, okay? And then you need to validate what operator is inside your chosen operators, okay? So you need to see what value is in there. Obviously, you can just go ahead and compare this inside another function. So you could just, have that there. Or you can just do it all inside of the equals button. And, obviously, of course, you need to make sure that you go ahead and work with these values. Now, these ones are fairly simple. And you know what? I'll go ahead and just give you guys the one for the clear last entry, since, it is something that we have not seen, which is string manipulation, all right? So let's go ahead and do that, right? So let's see who our clear last entry is. So we have the class of last entry clear. So let me just copy this over. And we'll create our variable for this. And we'll just call it TEBTN clear entry, and then we'll just set this equal to document dot query select or, and set that as so. Okay. So now let's just go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and put this all the way below since it's not as important. So I'll just say CEBTN dot, and then in here, obviously we can just go ahead and add an event listener straight to it. Click, comma, and then we can just go ahead and add our function in here. Now in here, if we want to go ahead and clear out the last value, so let me just go ahead and bring the calculator again. What this does is basically we have that, and say I made a mistake, and clear entry. So might have, you know what? Technically, it's this key that we're trying to emulate. There we go. So basically, just remove the last digit that you gone ahead and entered. So if you made a mistake, you can go ahead and go back. In this case, we're gonna be using this key for that, and then this one is just gonna clear all the values. Okay. So in this case, we want to go ahead and remove the last value inside of display inner text. So we can just go ahead and grab this. And then there are several built-in functions in JavaScript. So we can say dot slice. Why are you not working? Oh, I think I know why. Let's see. All right, so you need to put this guy inside a variable. So let's say let the. We'll just call this current equals such. You can say display2.innerText equals current dot slice, and we'll do 0, comma -1. That should go ahead and remove the last variable. It's null. Uncut error type CBT is null. What do you mean it's null? Oh, here we go. Again, be mindful of your dots, right? So there we go. So now, in theory, let's see if this actually went ahead and worked. So let's do, there we go. So now you have a way to remove the last entry in your calculation. Now I'm just curious to see. Let me grab the slice part, cut it out, and remove this. Let's see if that works. Yeah. So we really need to do it the first way, which is this way, right? So display, create a variable where we're going to be storing our string, and then just go ahead and alter that string directly, because this is not considered as a string element at that point in time to be able to use the slice. Okay. Oh, and obviously, save your changes. All right. Okay, guys. So, you know, it's a little bit more than halfway through your midterm. So, you, know, you have a solid starting point to go by. Again, this is the way that I would suggest you guys go about doing it. If you wanted to go down the the get an element by ID with the add event listeners, then you're more than welcome to it, right? Again, there is no wrong way of doing this as long as your calculator works. That is all that matters, okay? If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be allotting you guys the time on Tuesday to go ahead and work on your midterm in class, okay? So if you have any questions, we can go ahead and address them there, all right? But if that is all, have a nice day and enjoy your weekend.